Hi, everyone. I'm Marshall Garland. I'm a research scientist and co-director in the Center for Applied Research and Education. I apologize for the technology snafus there. This is my first time doing a remote presentation with the Zoom control. I didn't have a chance to do the pilot run last week. I'm going to give you kind of a regrettably brief orientation to this project since I only have 10 minutes. Some sort of just a brief background of the project, or sorry, brief overview. I'm going to provide a kind of a history and overview of the project. I'll provide some more information on how we identify eligible households, which is actually not trivial. Size of our kind of eligible subpanel, response rates, response patterns over time. Then I'm going to provide some links for accessing kind of the project-related resources for our survey. So about the project. The project's overseen by a team of researchers, including me, at CARE, the Center for Applied Research and Education, and an affiliated faculty member from the Rossier School, Morgan Polikoff, at USC. As I mentioned earlier, it's kind of part of the larger UAS, and our eligible household is a kind of subpanel from the larger UAS panel. The project has several goals that kind of motivate all of our work. The original animating goal that led to the inception of the project, and actually sort of my original affiliation with it, was to understand the immediate and ongoing impact of the pandemic on families and their children. This has sort of evolved over time to more about the sort of enduring impact of their experiences during the kind of depths and worst of the pandemic and school closures and stuff like that. Another goal that has become actually a larger part of our portfolio recently, since, as anybody who reads the news, education has become a sort of hotly contested political issue recently, but is to kind of measure and understand and explore the correlates of public opinion on a range of education policy issues. The last goal, which I think is kind of a repackaging or repurposing for our purposes of something that Ari mentioned earlier in his kind of kickoff presentation, which is to sort of make this information, these data, high quality nationally represented data on education publicly available to a wide swath of the research community, public policy community, and other people who are interested in public education in the US. So just a brief background on the administration history and timing. The first wave of administration, actually I need to start off with some brief horn tooting here. We were the earliest high quality national panel survey covering K through 12 education during the pandemic. First survey was administered in March 2020. Just as some of you who have young children may either choose or not choose to remember when there were waves of school closures and abrupt, kind of awkward, sudden transitions to remote learning. And, you know, we were in a unique position with the UAS panel, right? Because we were able to sort of highlight and draw attention to a lot of really troubling disparities in different families, particularly vulnerable, economically vulnerable families, ability to sort of transition nimbly to a remote learning environment. But also, and consistent with a lot of other survey work, but also work that's come out of large administrative data sets, identify like large disparities in access to in-person learning opportunities, but also participation. As we've moved away from the sort of more immediate effects of the pandemic, our work, or sort of a survey is administered in sort of less frequent intervals, and it's kind of more aligned to the school calendar. And it's capturing less pandemic-related impacts and more related to how students are sort of, and families are responding to some of the kind of legacy impacts of the pandemic, including learning loss, the psychological, social, mental well-being of children. We've received an additional round of funding we received a wave of funding for an additional wave of data collection in spring 2023. We're currently developing that instrument, and I don't have a timeline for when that's going to be in the field. So just to summarize, we've administered our survey module question or education module questions in 26 waves since like March 2020. It has covered a range of topics that are too many to enumerate here. I think in the last count, it was something like 80. I have no idea how many different questions. Some questions are newly added to each wave. Some questions are repeated. I provided sort of list here of with hyperlinks to news articles that are covering some of the findings that have emerged from these this project. I think we've moved away and from attendance modality and attendance preferences, right? As most kids are back in school in person. Some of the more recent surveys have covered topics related to parents' reports of children's grades and social and emotional health, opinions about controversial education topics, which was particularly interesting and received a lot of press because it came out right around the last election. So now I'm going to provide some more information about how we identify eligible households for our kind of subpanel within the larger UAS panel. This is not as straightforward as one might think. It's certainly not as straightforward as I thought when I first started working on this project. I think part of the issue is that our eligibility criterion, which is a household with a school-aged child, and by school-aged, we're essentially using compulsory attendance laws to sort of define that age range, which is 5 to 18. That is not an immutable characteristic. Kids age into or out of eligibility within a household. They also move. We've also sort of expanded the pool of potential households from which we can identify eligible kids since September of 2021. Originally, this was part of the UAS tracking sample, which I think everybody's heard quite a bit about during some presentations today. Now this is applied to, we're searching for eligible households and school-age children within the full UAS panel. So the way that we identify eligible households is just by asking them. Do they have a school-age child aged between 5 and 18 in the household? The number of eligible households since March 2020 has grown quite substantially by about 30%, from about 1,500 to 2,000. Typical participation rate ranges between 65 and 70%. Peak participation rate was during the halcyon days of early in the pandemic, depending on if you're a survey researcher or not, when everybody was responding to every survey that they had an opportunity to respond to. And I think the lowest participation rate that we've had is about 60%. And just to sort of clarify our eligibility rules here is that we don't disqualify someone for not being a parent of an eligible school-age child. Guardians, grandparents, siblings, anybody else who meets the sort of broader UAS panel eligibility requirements are eligible. So now we've talked a little bit about how we identify eligible households. There's an additional issue of eligible children within a household, right? For financial reasons, but also just sort of survey fatigue and burden. Our surveys are often times part of other survey modules that are fielded for a given wave. We do not ask questions pertaining to an individual child's educational experiences for each child enumerated in a household. Rather, we have randomly selected an individual child to essentially follow across time. Going back to my point about the eligibility criterion not being that may change over time. If the child moves out or ages out or moves out of the household for whatever reason, we attempt to find, if one exists, a replacement child, and then that child then replaces that originally randomly selected child, and then we follow that new child across time. So, you know, I think this sort of aligned with one of the kind of goals of the UAS, right? Is not only we're able to follow individual household member or respondents across time, but we're also able to sort of follow their responses about their children's experience, an individual child across time as they age. Sadly, if there's no eligible child remaining, our sample shrinks, although it's actually been growing over time in sort of conjunction with the growth of the UAS. So I mentioned that the survey response rates have varied between 65, 70%, but we also have a pretty high degree of persistence. I mean, obviously mechanically, we wouldn't necessarily expect every single household to respond to a survey, and each education survey across all 26 waves, going back to that point about kids aging out or aging in. New eligible households are added, and so by definition, they're not going to have prior education-related data about individual children. But anyway, in the most recent wave, which was administered in December 2022, January 2023, about 90% had responded to at least one education project survey in a previous wave. And of those respondents, about 13% had responded to all 25 prior waves. This tends to vary by topic and question, and that's partially just a function of how frequently certain questions or topics are covered. Because again, we repeat questions across time, particularly related to children's academic and social well-being. But in the most recent administration, about 700 had responded to questions about concerns regarding their child's mental health, academic standing in all 4 administrations. And about 75% or 1,400 had responded to 2 administrations of a behavioral screening questionnaire called the Strengths and Difficulties Questionnaire that sort of covers parents' reports of their child's psychological well-being, experience of depression, behavioral issues, stuff like that. Again, going back to this sort of this kind of issue where kids age out, or new households become newly eligible, the percent of eligible households who have responded to all prior waves has declined over time, but it's remained above 10% in each wave of collection. So where to find us on the web? We have a website with a lot of information. Here's a link. We have microdata for every survey wave administration in Stata DTA format and CSV formats. We have a blizzard of other information, including top line reports, methodology documents for each wave, survey questionnaires, survey routing. We just have a ton of information there. I should say also the survey routing and code books are actually hosted on this, I think on the UAS survey page. We also have a lot of information about published reports and news coverage of our findings. And I have a GIF here if you're navigating from the UAS, the main CSER page, how to get there. I don't know if it's working. No, it's not working. Okay. And that's it. Feel free to reach out. This was very brief, so I'm sure that there are questions or ideas for sort of further topics, research ideas, and I'd be happy to talk with you about them. Thanks.